Hello, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Wormuth. I'm the academic director of the Hudson River Valley Institute here at Marist University, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for coming tonight to the 14th annual Handel-Krom Lecture in Hudson River Valley History and Culture. I want to point out immediately the generosity of the folks who have endowed this lecture and allowed it to go on year after year. Of course, it's Shirley Handel, who I see right down directly in front of me. Shirley, of course, is a noted leader in the Mid-Hudson and the Hudson River Valley more generally in a variety of community causes. Was on the board of the Roosevelt Institute, on Dutchess Community College here at the Marist College Advisory Board for Hudson River Valley Studies. But I also want to point out the late Bern Handel and Gilbert Crum, retired U.S. military, who also participated in the generosity of funding this lecture. Tonight, we're offering this event in a hybrid format. This evening, we have the group here is assembled right in front of us here, and also many people joining us through Zoom. Now, in terms of, I want to also acknowledge a few other folks here. I jumped ahead of myself. The HR Advisory Board, Shirley Handel. The chair of the Hudson River Valley Institute Advisory Board, Alex Reese, who I just saw a second ago. And the vice chair of the Hudson River Valley Advisory Board and Marist alum, Elijah Bender, who I see over here. I also want to point out the Marist College trustee, Steve Efron, right here as well, and want to thank them for coming out tonight. Also, a special welcome to the virtual audience joining by Zoom. In addition to the group assembled here, we have this large group of folks from across New York and the country joining us, so a special hello to them. Hello. And I would like to also acknowledge the work of the Hudson River Valley Institute Executive Director, Andy Villani, who I know is here because he's done so much in setting this together. I just don't happen to see him. Senior Program Director, Chris Przlowski, who just helped make this sound work. And Operations Director, Tisha Dunstan, in putting together everything for this 14th annual lecture here at Marist University, but for all that they do through the course of the year here at the Institute. Tonight's speaker, Pieter Estersohn, is a renowned photographer of architecture and interiors and the author of 2 books on the Hudson River Valley, Life Along the Hudson, the Historic Country Estates of the Livingston Family, back in 2018, and more recently, 2024, Back to the Land, A New Way of Life in the Country. His photography regularly appears in magazines and books focused on interior design and lifestyle. He serves on the boards of the Historic Red Hook in Dutchess County and the Calvert Vaux Preservation Alliance. This evening, he'll be presenting the 2025 Handel-Krom Lecture in Hudson River Valley History titled Back to the Land, Connecting the Hudson River Valley's Agrarian Past and Farming Future. Please welcome Pieter Estersohn.
Hello, hello. Well, first of all, I just want to say how pleased I am to be here this evening. I think this is a spectacular magazine, and I work with a lot of magazines, and I'm very aware of the challenges of publication in 2025, and I just think you guys do a spectacular, spectacular job. So I'm thrilled to be here. And we just had a dinner with some regional bounty from the area and had a delicious dinner. But I just want to take a couple of moments and just sort of introduce myself a little bit. I am up to the moment that I signed the contract to do this book, was not an expert on the subject. I've done 63 books on architecture, design, preservation. This was not my roadhouse. And my editor at Rizzoli, Sandy Gilbert Friedis, it was the last year of COVID, and she said to me, well, Pieter, what book do you want to do? I sort of do at least one book of my own every year, every couple of years. And I was up in Red Hook. My son's school kept getting closed down, so he was home and angry to be sheltered with his father for such a protracted period of time. And you can't be up here and not be aware of the subject of agriculture and food. I mean, we're immersed in it. And, I mean, a mile up the road is the Culinary Institute. There's farms galore up here. And it was a subject that was interesting to me. So I sort of did a gestalt, and I went into this project from a complete place of humility and curiosity. So I am a gigantic and out of control history nerd. So obviously my book on agriculture in this region sort of focused a lot, particularly in the preamble, on the history of the subject in the region. I then went on to, oh, can we get this be going? I'm not going to be sort of addressing each slide individually, but there will be a slideshow that will be going on. And we'll have questions at the end, or if you want to just interrupt me, you can certainly just ask a question, and it's going to be a very informal talk tonight. But anyway, so I'm just going to start off with a quote that I have in the book, which I will tell you who it is when we're done. But he says, "I know of no pursuit in which more zeal and important service can be rendered to any country than by improving its agriculture." 1794, Mr. George Washington. So I found that to be true. And basically during COVID, photography had stopped. Of the 63 books that I've worked on, most of them, there's my grandparents. I'll talk about them in just a moment. That's my house up in Red Hook. But photography had stopped. And so I was just writing, and, with Rich Soley, we sort of came up for this idea of like a new wave of agriculture. And I wanted to also address the history of the subject. So there's a lot of farms in the book that are 11, 16, 8 generations in the same family, but in those historic and heritage farms, what are these farms doing to pivot into the 21st century? The same template is not possible than it was when they started the farm. So, now being here for 15 years, I bought my house. It's called Stotts Hall. It was built in 1839 in Red Hook. I'm a photographer. 1839 is the year that photography was invented, and it was on a street that has my father's nickname in it. So after looking at 100 houses and having every realtor on the planet tell me that I was never going to buy a house, I listened to the universe, and I ended up in Red Hook. And I just had such a curiosity of driving and looking around, and the subject matter just dovetails for me so perfectly with this journal, which I read like cover to cover, and I find it absolutely fascinating. But the guy that had built my house, as I was researching it, as the history nerd that I am, was a guy called Henry Stotts. So you've heard of Stottsburg, which is nearby. The Stotts family moved here in the 17th century, and Henry Stotts had about 2,000 acres, and he built his home in Red Hook, and it's the most incredible, like, prized New York soil. It has all these sort of incredible qualities to it. That's why he put his house there. He had 2,000 acres, and he was the chairman of the Dutchess County Agricultural Society. I guess when the state fair was originally in Poughkeepsie before it moved to Red Hook. So what fascinated me also with buying this house was that the gentleman that was farming all the property around me was someone called Kenny Migliorelli. And Kenny, actually the cover of the book is one of the farms that Kenny farms around the corner from me. And then I am not a farmer. I enjoy writing and learning about farming, but I'm not the hands-on farmer. But Kenny farms the property where I live, and does a spectacular job. And he was one of the gentlemen in 1978 who started making 4 o'clock in the morning runs from Dutchess County down to the Green Market in Union Square. And one of the things I love about history and sort of cross-pollination of history is how, as the more you learn, the more all of the dots connect. So I went to Sarah Lawrence my first 2 years. I was working for Andy Warhol for Interview Magazine. I'd been collecting photography. And I was doing all the interviews on like Avedon and Penn and Louise Del Wolfe and Eisenstadt. So I would take the subway down, I'd get off on 17th Street and I'd walk through the Union Square Market. I didn't know what the heck it was, but it was a spectacular construct that was started by Barry Benepe in 1976. And as a response to the fact that there wasn't great food in the 1960s and 1970s in New York. I mean, there was Gristedes and that was about it. There was no fresh food. If you wanted to get fresh food, you had to leave the city and drive to the country. This was a way of aggregating a lot of wonderful produce into the city. And it was really the seeds of where the farm to table movement globally began. So the farmers market was there from the mid 70s onward. Chefs would open up bricks and mortar and open up restaurants nearby so that they could have access to great produce, and on and on and on. So now we have, this incredible chef relationship with fresh food that sort of permeated the entire planet at this point. So when I started the book, I just sort of dug in, asking questions, driving around, visiting farms. As the book nerd that I am, I bought first editions by A.J. Downing, and I read all of the issues of The Horticulturalist, which was a magazine in the 1840s up until 1830s and 1840s that he wrote for. So A.J. Downing lived across the river in Newburgh. I'm sure many of you may be familiar with that, and was sort of a little bit like the Martha Stewart of the time. He was writing about horticulture. He was providing ways of channeling the teachings of Capability Brown, Humphrey Repton, Loudon, English landscapers and horticulturalists into the zones where we live now for North American farms. And so I was reading The Horticulturalist, a magazine called The Field. And I have a very funny quote from him, where he says in The Horticulturalist, next to maintaining a steam yacht, the most expensive pursuit in the Hudson Valley. This is one of the things that I discovered while doing this book. And while I was having dinner across from Alex Reese, we were talking about, he said, don't make this too romantic. And I said, well, there is a lot of romance in this, and there's a lot of beauty and a lot of inspiration. But this is like brutally difficult work and humbling work. And I had so many moments doing this book where I would, because I photograph it and write it, where I would leave the farm and I would just stop a block down and I would stop the car and I would just really process what I had seen and the dedication that I had seen from the people that I had just spent the day photographing or interviewing. And I would think, God, I have so many cranky friends in New York City who kvetch about everything, and then they're not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and dealing with the cows, and then nature happens and everything that you've planned goes out the window. So I want to really express here this evening how moved I was by everybody that I documented in the book, and how the nobility of what they're doing touched my heart over and over and over again. So yeah. But just to go back to the photograph earlier, actually there's Kenny Migliorelli right there on his farm on Gusky Road. So my grandparents, there was a picture of them earlier, had a sort of gentleman's farm in Millwood, which you pass on the Taconic coming up here in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. They ended up, my grandfather had about 100 acres in the middle of about 1,000 acres of a dairy farm, and IBM surreptitiously under another name had gone and collected all the property all around him. And he was like, I don't want to sell. I don't want to sell. I don't want to sell. He didn't know it was IBM until the very last moment. And so he just kept sort of holding out. And finally he sold. And now it's the Eero Saarinen built the Watson headquarters there. But I grew up with my grandparents and my mom and my aunt telling me all of these romantic, wonderful stories. So despite the fact that I got my degree in economics and then went into photography and had never been a farmer, I had on my shoulders these wonderful stories, these seductive stories about growing up on a farm. And that's sort of one of the things that directed me into doing this book. And coming up with the sort of combination of chapters, I didn't want this to be a book about billionaires farming. There's a real cross section. I mean, I have everything from, different business models. There's a guy here who is a forager and who just sort of goes and picks chanterelles and ramps. And I was recommended to him by another couple who live in Copiague who have a weed farm. There they go. Wow, perfect. Yeah. And so they told me about this forager, and I contacted him, and we met on the side of the road, and it had every appearance of being a very louche encounter, but he had to like vet me, and then he took me up to his secret place. We had to make sure no cars were going, and we went up this hill. And I have a friend of the family who had snuck me into Skull and Bones at Yale, which probably I'll be murdered once I release that information. But I love AJ Davis, and AJ Davis had designed the Skull and Bones Club at Yale, so I did get to go in there. But I sort of had to pass the same degree of vetting to go up. And I'm 65 years old now, and I had my cameras with me. It started to rain, and he went on this ascent. I mean, I thought it was going to have to get airlifted by having a heart attack going up this mountain, and found these fields of ramps. And then I met him another day, and we went looking for chanterelles. So there was a real mix of different business models and different situations. And I wanted to find the 35 chapters that really expressed the region in a non-redundant way. So there's a lot of farms that didn't make it into the book, but yeah, so I wanted to find the real pulse point of the Hudson River Valley in 2024. I wanted to cover animals, vegetables, fruit, bread making, and I also covered some very, very interesting families with amazing ties to the land. When they come up here, there's a family called the Lifers who he was a professor at Columbia. He met his wife at an international dance there. They left New York. They live in Livingston, and they have some amazing kids. And they make croissants and pain au chocolat, and they sell them at the Livingston market. So they have a very, very limited income. And then everything they do is either trade. I thought the business, the model of very intentionally choosing this as a way of having your life was fascinating. They trade with everybody. They barter. They grow the cow. They get the butter. They make the cheese. They kill the cow. They eat the cow. It's just this very, very holistic approach. And if there's something like electricity that they need in the house, they just trade with people. So I thought that was just a beautiful and very intentional way of sort of setting up the life that you want, the life that you want for your kids. It's not for everybody, but I thought it merited some attention. And a lot of people during COVID, and this was something that I was just watching as a wave, were choosing, I would make all these jokes about these hipsters coming up from Williamsburg with their $500 Japanese indigo dyed jeans and hand woven cashmere farmer shirts. And the posing part of it. And some of them, got on the next train to Amtrak and had to leave the city because it's really, as I will continue to say, is very, very hard and very, very challenging. But a lot of them stayed, and a lot of them have put together amazing practices and amazing businesses and are finding niche areas where things haven't been addressed with agriculture. And the fascinating thing to me as an historian was that so many of them are referring back to pre-industrialized practices, using horsepower, not wanting to use gas and tractors, referring back to the teachings of Rudolf Steiner and Alexander von Humboldt, and even Native American teachings as well. So, so similar to photography, I'm a single parent and I like to play tennis. Photography is you're hyper present in the moment. You do all of your tricks. It's almost like farming as well. You do all your tricks, you do all your research, and then nature happens, and then a cloud comes, and then there's wind, the sun changes. So I drew a lot of parallels between agriculture and, for me personally, parenting, which create, where you're really called upon to have your antenna sort of super sensitized to where you need to be at that given moment. And agriculture certainly is that situation as well. Oh, what a lovely farm stand we have here, Alex. So anyway, I told you about the Union Square Market when I was working at Interview. That was in 1978. But when I was digging, I don't know whether any of you were shooting heroin in the 17th century, but Peter Stuyvesant started the very first farmers market in what is now Tompkins Square Park in 1647. And it was a way, I mean, that was complete rural farmland at that point, but it was a meeting place for people to bring their produce in and sell it. So I talk a lot in the book about soil health. I came up with the word soilophile, which my editor at Rizzoli said I had to sort of break down for the readers because nobody was going to understand it. But everybody in the book, like, soil is so important. And so there's a lot of information about regenerative soil practices. I just completely nerd out about like worms and all sorts of icky things. But like, if you've ever gone scuba diving, learning about the soil is very similar. It's like this microcosm when you really start to look and you start to like understand and analyze the soil. It's like this, like it's like going underwater and seeing like sea creatures and stuff like that. And I had also been very grumpy for very long about all of these adjectives that were on menus, like heirloom, heritage, old-fashioned, all of these adjectives that have sort of permeated menus for the last 20 years, which are in place because there's still, I think, a desire for people to have homegrown food and food that is grown on small and medium-sized farms. And one of the things I cut, there's the chanterelles and the ramps that Damien collects. Every farm in this book was sort of a small to medium-sized farm. This is sort of a result of like big ag and really wanting to make the case for small farms and medium-sized farms. So in 1609, Henry Hudson has the following quote as he was taking his boat up the Hudson River here. Quote, wild grapes, walnut trees, beans, pumpkins, melons, fish, turkeys, tobaccos, corn, and wheat. I am therefore of the opinion that scarcely any part of America is better adapted for the settlers of the colonies from our country than the Hudson River Valley. So he noticed that this was so firmly established, so in place. And just to make a little bit of a note, I find this very interesting. I just found it out today on October 4th and 5th. The Stockbridge Munsee peoples, which are part of the offshoot of the Mohican tribe, will be having a powwow in Columbia County in New Lebanon for the first time in 200 years. So I love this sort of circular nature of passing on the teachings of what's going on with soil. But after Henry Hudson, we had all sorts of practices that the Dutch brought, the English brought, the Germans, the Palatines, the Huguenots, the enslaved populations. They all added their own inputs, and every group has sort of had their input into the particular zone that we're living in and what's needed insofar as timing, burning, etc. In the 19th century, strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries were domesticated finally and grown on farms. Before that, they had just been foraged. But the idea of crop rotation continues still as a very simplistic necessity in a similar fashion to the 18th and 19th century practices. Washington Irving references this very often in his sketchbook. In 1631, we had the patroon system. And if you farmed and were a tenant of a patroon, like the Van Rensselaers, it was very formulaic, and you had to produce for the patroon 20 bushels of wheat, 4 fat fowl, they had to be fat fowl, and a day's worth of labor with a team of horses. In the previous book, Life Along the Hudson, which I had written about the Livingston family, I sort of got a little bit into their relationship with the land. I've been chair of the Friends of Claremont, and I had seen the ancestry book, and there were 400 Robert Livingstons, which sort of pulled me into that subject. I was like, I couldn't figure out who everybody was, so I just really did a dive. And in 1686, Robert Livingston, the first Robert Livingston, who was the lord of the manor, created the manor of Livingston. And then in 1710, he brought the Huguenots over and the Palatines, and that's who eventually sort of spread out in mid-Dutchess and upper Dutchess County and started building a lot of the farms. But at that point, when Robert Livingston moved here, he married Alida Schuyler Van Rensselaer in 1679, creating a path forward with land from the Berkshires through the Catskills. So the Livingstons would all of their houses lined up on the east side of the river, and they would all look across the river to the Catskills and refer to them as our hills or our mountains. The Erie Canal was opened in 1825, dramatically changing the dynamic of agriculture in this region because there was huge amounts of land that were now accessible further west. And so all of the wheat that was grown here could move over there. So this area sort of had to pivot a little bit, and they pivoted very intelligently into dairy and apples and things that really needed a proximity to the city. And in the 1840s, the railroad started to sort of snake its way up the Hudson River here. And so they had very quick access to the city. So we have Frederick Edwin Church, who was at Olana, who paid homage in some of his largest paintings to his mentor, who was Alexander von Humboldt, who had sort of this Prussian observation of the very earliest speaking about the interconnectedness of nature. And this is still a subject that permeates these farms. How is everything connected? How does it all connect together? There's closed farms right now, and we talk a lot about organic farms. What does that mean? It's a very confusing subject. I try to explain it to the best of my ability. There's a lot of farmers in this book who are not certified as organic because it takes a gigantic amount of paperwork. And basically, they're on the farms, they're going home, they're having dinner, and it's hard to have the 2 or 3 hours necessary at the end of the day to sort of do all the paperwork. But a lot of them are building trust with their customers through farm stands, farmers markets, et cetera. So after von Humboldt, spoke about and traveled all around South America and talking about the interconnectedness of nature. Rudolf Steiner started to speak about soil fertility in the 1920s, coining the phrase biodynamic farming, one that is self-sustainable, where everything on the farm comes from the farm, still used all the time in organic farming. And one of the goals in this project was to collect the voices that have flocked to the region with mindfulness and great intentions and energy and determination. And a lot of the farms that I talk about, I had mentioned, have been in the families for a very, very long time. The Phillip family in Claverack built Talavera, which is their family house. It's about 16 generations ago. And speaking to this new generation, there's 5 siblings that have inherited the house. Layla was telling me that their grandparents used to spray the apples with lead, and that her mom sort of chose to counterpoint that by planting pollinators all around and to create a more holistic environment for the trees. But now the property was inherited by 5 siblings. And what do you do moving forward? How do you take a farm that has been in the same family for 16 generations and make it viable right now? Montgomery Place, another chapter in the book, was opened by a woman in 1805. And now it's farmed by Doug and Talea on the same grounds. Rokeby has been in the family now for 12 generations. Shoving Leopard Farm is there with one of the people that still lives in the house, Marina. And they're finding ways to sustain the property and to keep the property and to keep it viable as a working farm. I speak a lot about philanthropy in the book as well. There's 3 or 4 farms in the book which have addressed how to create training for young people who might not normally have the space to go into farming. And then a lot of the farms are taking what they're producing, circling it back into the local community through food pantries, et cetera. Sky High Farm was started by Dan Colin, who's an artist, who now collaborates with Supreme, Comme des Garçons, and Balenciaga in coming up with t-shirts, sweatshirts designed by Jenny Holzer, different artists, that are then sold at stores, all the money going into a foundation which creates space for young people to be able to work on a farm and learn their trade. So the guy that built my farm, Henry Stotts, I found his notes, and he had copious notes on plaster and ashes as fertilizer. Von Humboldt also had discovered bird guano in Peru, which had gigantic amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus that are all necessary for soil health, and it became an area of importing bird shit to America for gardens, and people made gigantic fortunes of it during the Gilded Age. I learned a lot about soil and tilling, mycorrhizal fungi that stores carbon in soil through its underground threads, microbes. I speak a lot about ESG funds, which are environment, social governance funds, where now in America, there's $18 million now invested, so that if you have investments that you would like to make, you can sort of have an intentionality about where you want your money to be invested in funds that support what your values are. So right now in America, the average farmer is about 65 years old. And I wanted to do this book, and we did it at a very accessible price point because I wanted to do something that was hopefully attractive to look at and seductive to young people, because you can just sort of do the math and extrapolate, 5 years from now, 10 years now, if the average farmer is 65 years old, we're going to be in a really sticky wicket. So we really need to have young people. It's very, very important. There's places like Glenwood down in Cold Spring who are doing a spectacular job in creating space for people to learn about farming, how to farm, how to run a farm, what the financial ramifications are. So that's really important. The Gallup poll, there's 3 different Gallup polls that I referenced where 80% of people live in urban areas in America right now, but rural life is still the most desired. And 1/3 of all American jobs is in some way tied to food. So one of the last things that I really wanted to do with this book was create the space for people to see what goes into farming on a small and medium level, and to really try to seduce people into being willing to spend a little bit more money on organically grown food, on food that's grown, not on gigantic, soybean farms in the Midwest, but on smaller farms that are really having a little bit more oversight on what they're doing. And then the very last thing is, so to be willing to pay a little bit more for the food. And then just the A.J. Downing quote, which I think he had paraphrased from somebody else, which was, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so, yeah, I just wanted to show the mindfulness and wonderful nobility that goes into this subject in our region and the history of it, and share that with you guys. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I told Tom, please stump the author. If there's any questions about, and I can certainly just, talk about the pictures some more, but yes, Alex.
I wanted to make a statement. Thank you so much for this presentation. And your photography is beyond belief.
Oh.
It's so beautiful and told a wonderful story just by looking at those images. It's quite amazing. I mean, I grew up in this valley, and early on it was still big ag. There was big apples, big dairy, and unfortunately it doesn't cut anymore. That those businesses, they're shrinking. Some still exist, but this is the future of agriculture here. And I just take my hat off to the people who are here, who you have here in your book, and the way you presented it. God bless. It's really
Yeah,
great.
no, thank you for saying that. I was touched and moved and discovering everybody's passion about what they do. And it was fascinating to me how people navigated to the niche that they had sort of ended up in. This guy has Turkish sheep, Karakol sheep. So, they had spent time in Turkey. It's just fascinating how people's practices come together. It speaks to something about who they are, and what resonates with them. So, and to your point about photography, I love English 18th century painting. So one of the great things about digital photography is that you can bring in the clouds. So I kept, having my assistant who helps me with post-production, just more clouds, more clouds. I want to see the clouds. I want to see like the composition of them and everything like that. So this couple here, Full Circus Farm, they're called, and they said they felt free to come up with the name Full Circus Farm after meeting Marina at Rokeby, who had Shoving Leopard Farm. But they just use horses. She doesn't want to use any gasoline, and then they do tree grafting. But yes, was there another question back here? Yes. Hey.
I wanted to ask you about the foraging. Is that like a big thing going on in the Hudson Valley, or?
Well, it has been for thousands of years here. I mean, that's, I guess, was the beginning of agriculture here. I don't know how big it is, but the people that are doing it are actually able to sort of monetize, and they create networks with chefs and restaurants that really appreciate the nature of what they're producing. So I think it is. And I think, and I've met also a lot of people that just don't do this for a living, but just, you know, they know the seasons, they know where to go. And people like to just sort of go in and, you know, just discover and find what they can. Certainly with berries. I mean, you know, you can bring your kid to the berry picking farm, which I did over and over and over again with my son. But then I also know people that are sort of going out into nature and just foraging on their own. Yes.
I personally know a family that runs a small farm and they've had to do some interesting diversification with like, for instance, they work with the film and television industry. So like farm stands. During your research, did you find any interesting or trends in diversification that don't apply to the farm necessarily?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I would say most farms need to have a plan B. And historically, at least in the 20th century, historically, like maybe mom would be a teacher and dad would be the farmer. I mean, there was the perfect business model is that there's a plan B or there's another steady stream of income. There's one farm right here, this farm right here over in Marlborough. I think 6 or 7 different generations in the family. They pivoted to also, I think they spent $1 million on weed. They have this machine that rolls joints. They have a machine that makes distillate. It's like $10,000. It's like crazy. You know, and then they also grow broccoli and et cetera. But I think they were prescient in, I mean, and look at the site. Look at the site where they are, like just right on the river there. It's spectacular. But yeah, I mean, pick your own, you know, started early on where instead of hiring, you know, gigantic teams of people to pick the fruit, they would open it up. It opened it up to the public. People would come up from New York. It was things that people love to do with their children. So these people are really, really thinking. So if there's a way to pivot, if there's a way to monetize and leverage what they're doing, I saw it happen, and we sort of discuss all the permutations of what you can do with what you know, with your 1 acre or your 50 acres or your 2,000 acres. Yes.
Colleges, I know like Cornell has a very
Sure,
reputable
of course.
agriculture program. But are you aware of other colleges either in the region or maybe Marist included, I don't know, or even outside the Hudson Valley? Is this
A mile from Bard campus, and Bard bought, Leon Botstein bought, Bard bought Montgomery Place, which is a Livingston house, a few years ago, and they have an incredible farming program there, agricultural program, and an amazing, I mean, and for everybody here, if you're interested in AJ Davis, like make a point, please go there. All the outbuildings were designed by Davis in the 1840s to 1860s. You know, it's just like heaven from a point of view of like mid-19th century architecture. Glenwood, which I mentioned before, is a spectacular program. Yeah, so I think there is a call out from young people in their 20s and 30s. And as I said before, a lot of people that are really intentionally, I don't want to live in the city. I want to raise my kids in the country. These are, you know, it's a little bit of a wave. And now I've been in the Hudson Valley for 15 years. I finally don't feel like the newbie anymore. I feel like I can sort of have an opinion and a little bit of skin in the game and street cred insofar as clocking these waves. I mean, you know, and they've happened, you know, ad nauseum since you know, for the last 300 years. You know, at one point the Astors were the parvenus that came up here. So you know, there's this new generation of people that are moving up here and going into agriculture. And some of them have studied, you know, like Sarah Chase at Chase Home Farm went to Oberlin, studied agriculture and women's and gender studies, came back and is running the farm. Her brother's doing the cheeses there. But she, you know, there's people going away and coming back, studying, coming back. And I see more and more programs. And this book was very sort of Hudson Valley centric. So I don't know sort of in circles going out geographically, but definitely a call and an interest in it. Anybody else? Cool. Okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you.